The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Judge Patricia Harrison's courtroom in Austin, Texas, but 7-year-old Emma Martinez couldn't see the light. Her world had been shrouded in darkness for 6 long months ever since that horrific October night when her childhood shattered like broken glass on a kitchen floor. Now, sitting in the imposing witness chair that dwarfed her tiny frame, Emma clutched her blood-stained teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, the same warm companion she'd held while hiding in her bedroom closet, listening to her mother's screams echoing through their once happy home. The packed courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as attorneys shuffled papers and family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Court reporter Janet Mills adjusted her stenograph machine, ready to capture every word of what promised to be one of the most crucial custody hearings in Travis County's history. But the most important witness, the only person who truly knew what had happened that terrible night, remained locked in impenetrable silence. Emma's delicate fingers traced the rusty brown stains on Mr. Button's fur, stains that served as a constant reminder of the night her father's rage had exploded like a violent storm. The teddy bear had absorbed her mother's blood when Emma grabbed him while crawling across the kitchen floor to reach the phone. Those stains had survived multiple attempts at washing, as if the universe itself demanded that the evidence remain visible, waiting for justice. At Emma's feet lay Scout, a magnificent golden retriever whose amber eyes held in wisdom that seemed almost human. The therapy dog's thick coat gleamed under the fluorescent courtroom lights, and his steady breathing provided the only sound that seemed to calm Emma's racing heart. Scout wasn't just any therapy animal. He was Emma's lifeline, her protector. And unknowingly to everyone in that courtroom, he was about to become her voice. 3 rows behind Emma, her mother Sarah Martinez sat with white knuckles gripping the wooden bench. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent wondering if she'd ever hear her daughter's voice again. Sarah's own wounds had healed the broken ribs, the bruised throat, the split lip, but watching her vibrant, chatty little girl retreat into this shell of silence was a torture worse than any physical pain David had ever inflicted. Sarah's attorney, Lisa Chun, had warned her that without Emma's testimony, their chances of winning custody were slim to none. David Martinez was a master manipulator who could charm judges and juries with his practiced smile and fabricated tears. Judge Patricia Harrison, a veteran of family court who had seen the worst of humanity parade through her courtroom for over 3 decades, studied the small figure in the witness chair with growing concern. In 30 years of presiding over custody battles, domestic violence cases, and child abuse proceedings, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people. Something about this case felt different, heavier, more dangerous than the typical he said she said divorce proceedings that filled her docket. The judge's weathered hands held Emma's case file, pages thick with police reports, medical records, and psychological evaluations. The night of October 15th had been a turning point that changed 3 lives forever. Police had responded to a 911 call made by a 7-year-old girl whose whispered, terrified voice could barely be heard over the sounds of violence in the background. When officers arrived at the Martinez family home in the affluent Westlake neighborhood, they found Sarah unconscious on the kitchen floor, David nowhere to be found, and Emma locked in her bedroom closet, covered in her mother's blood and clutching that teddy bear. The official police report painted a clear picture of domestic violence, but David's high-powered attorney had spent months crafting an alternative narrative. Richard Hayes, known throughout Texas legal circles as the Magician for his ability to make guilty clients appear innocent, had built David's defense on the foundation that Sarah was an unstable, vindictive ex-wife who had coached their daughter to hate her father. Without Emma's testimony to contradict this narrative, the strategy might actually work. Emma's silence wasn't defiance or stubbornness. It was survival. Child psychologist Dr. James Wright had explained to the court that selective mutism following trauma was the mind's way of protecting itself from further harm. Emma's young brain had learned that speaking about what she'd witnessed could bring danger, so it had simply shut down her ability to vocalize those memories. The irony was devastating. The very mechanism designed to protect Emma was now preventing her from protecting herself and her mother. As the courtroom prepared for the day's proceedings, Emma's small body began to tremble almost imperceptibly. Scout, attuned to every shift in his young companion's emotional state, lifted his massive head and pressed closer to her legs. The dog had been specially trained at the Canine Companions for Independence facility, but his bond with Emma went far beyond standard therapy animal protocols. In the 3 months since they'd been paired together, Scout had become Emma's translator, her emotional barometer, and her silent guardian. What nobody in that courtroom understood, yet not the judge, not the attorneys, not even Emma's mother, was that the little girl and her golden companion had developed something extraordinary during their time together. It was more than the typical human-animal bond that therapy dogs were known for creating. Emma and Scout had forged a secret language, a communication system so subtle and sophisticated that it was invisible to untrained eyes, but crystal clear to those who knew how to interpret it. Emma's fingers moved in barely perceptible patterns against Mr. Button's matted fur, and Scout's ears twitched in response. Her breathing changed rhythm, and the dog shifted his position accordingly. These weren't random movements or coincidental responses. They were conversations conducted in a language born from trauma, refined through necessity, and perfected through desperate love. As Judge Harrison called the court to order and the custody hearing officially began, Emma Martinez sat in profound silence, holding the key to truth in her small hands. Her father's freedom, her mother's safety, and her own future hung in the balance, all dependent on whether anyone would recognize that sometimes the most powerful testimony comes not from spoken words, but from the courage to communicate in whatever way possible. The stage was set for a courtroom drama unlike any other, where a child's silence would speak louder than any words ever could, and where justice would be served by the most unlikely of partnerships. A traumatized little girl and her extraordinary dog about to change the legal system forever. 3 months earlier, Sarah Martinez sat in her battered Honda Civic outside the Canine Companions for Independence facility in San Antonio, watching her daughter Emma stare blankly out the passenger window. The 40-minute drive had been conducted in complete silence, not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful car ride, but the suffocating silence of a child whose voice had been stolen by trauma. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, the same hands that had once braided Emma's hair for school pictures and wiped away tears from scraped knees, now helpless against an enemy she couldn't fight. The sleek, modern facility before them represented their last hope. Dr. James Wright, Emma's child psychologist, had suggested therapy dogs as a potential breakthrough treatment. But Sarah knew this was more than a medical recommendation. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass in a game where losing meant David would eventually win custody of their daughter. The thought sent ice through Sarah's veins. She had seen what David was capable of when his mask slipped, and she couldn't bear the thought of Emma alone with that monster. Inside the facility, Maria Rodriguez was putting the finishing touches on what she privately called Project Phoenix, a revolutionary communication system that had evolved from her 15 years as a special education teacher before becoming a therapy dog trainer. Maria had always been a rebel in both professions, challenging conventional methods and pushing boundaries that others feared to cross. Her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, earned through countless nights developing training protocols that most experts deemed impossible. The system had started accidentally 2 years ago, When Maria was working with an autistic boy named Marcus, who had developed his own sign language with his therapy dog, Ranger, Maria recognized something profound in their interaction, a form of communication that bypassed traditional speech barriers and tapped directly into the emotional connection between human and animal. She began documenting the gestures, categorizing responses, and eventually developing a comprehensive vocabulary of hand signals, body movements, and breathing patterns that specially trained dogs could interpret and respond to. What made Maria's system revolutionary wasn't just the communication aspect, it was the therapeutic breakthrough it represented. Children who couldn't speak about their trauma could express it through movement. Dogs, with their incredible sensitivity to human emotion and body language, became living interpreters of pain, fear, hope, and healing. The system had shown remarkable success with autistic children, but Maria had never attempted to use it with a selective mutism case resulting from severe trauma. When Sarah and Emma finally entered the facility, Maria's breath caught in her throat. Emma was smaller than she'd expected, more fragile, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of endless nightmares and a hollowness that made Maria's heart ache. But it was Emma's hands that caught Maria's attention. They moved constantly, in small, almost imperceptible patterns, as if the child was trying to communicate with an invisible companion. "She does that all the time now," Sarah whispered to Maria as they walked through the facility's main corridor, lined with photos of successful human-animal partnerships. "The doctors say it's a nervous habit, but sometimes I wonder if she's trying to tell me something, and I just don't know how to listen." Maria knelt down to Emma's eye level in the main training room, a bright, open space filled with colorful toys, agility equipment, and the soft sounds of dogs and handlers working together. "Hi, Emma," she said gently. "Would you like to meet someone very special?" Emma's dark eyes flickered with the first hint of curiosity Maria had seen since their arrival. From across the room, a magnificent golden retriever approached with measured, confident steps. Scout was 3 years old, in his prime, with an intelligence that seemed to radiate from his amber eyes. He had been training for this moment for 2 years, mastering not just traditional therapy dog skills, but Maria's revolutionary communication system. Scout could interpret over 200 different signals and respond appropriately to each one, creating a dialogue that had never before existed between human and animal. The first meeting between Emma and Scout was electric with possibility. Emma's constant hand movements stopped entirely when Scout approached, as if recognizing something kindred in this gentle giant. Scout, in turn, sat perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as he studied the small girl, with an intensity that suggested he understood the gravity of their introduction. "Scout has a special talent," Maria explained to Sarah, while keeping her voice calm and reassuring for Emma's benefit. "He can understand things that people sometimes have trouble expressing. Would you like to see?" Without waiting for a response that she knew wouldn't come verbally, Maria demonstrated several basic signals. A closed fist meant stay, an open palm meant come. But the subtle variations, the angle of her wrist, the tension in her fingers, the rhythm of her breathing created layers of meaning that transformed simple commands into complex emotional expressions. Scout responded to each nuance with precision that bordered on the miraculous. Emma watched with growing fascination, her small hand beginning to mimic Maria's movements unconsciously. When Emma tentatively raised her hand in what approximated the come signal, Scout immediately responded, moving closer and gently placing his massive head near her lap. For the first time in 3 months, Emma's face showed something other. In blank despair, there was wonder, connection, and the faintest glimmer of hope. "This is just the beginning," Maria told Sarah later that evening after Emma had fallen asleep in the car, emotionally exhausted, but somehow more peaceful than Sarah had seen her since the attack. What Emma and Scout have the potential to build together goes far beyond traditional therapy. They could develop a communication system so sophisticated that Emma won't just find her voice again. She might find a better voice, one that can express things too deep for words. Sarah stared back at the facility as they drove away, watching the lights in the training rooms where other miracles were undoubtedly taking place. She didn't fully understand what Maria was proposing, but she recognized the first spark of hope she'd felt since that horrible October night. Emma and Scout had connected in a way that defied explanation, and sometimes the most powerful solutions came from the most unexpected sources. Over the following weeks, as Emma and Scout began their intensive training together, neither Sarah nor Maria could have predicted that they were creating more than just a therapeutic partnership. They were forging a secret weapon that would eventually expose David Martinez's true nature and change the legal system's understanding of how trauma victims could seek justice. The alliance between a broken little girl and an extraordinary dog was about to become the most powerful testimony a courtroom had ever witnessed. David Martinez stepped out of his gleaming black BMW in the courthouse parking lot, adjusting his $3,000 Armani suit with the practiced precision of a man who understood that appearances were everything. At 42, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that had always opened doors, steel gray eyes that could shift from warm charm to cold fury in milliseconds, a strong jawline that suggested reliability, and a smile that had convinced countless people that he was exactly what he appeared to be, a successful businessman and devoted father wrongfully accused by a vindictive ex-wife. The transformation was masterful. Gone was the man who had thrown Sarah down the stairs in a cocaine-fueled rage, who had threatened to kill both her and Emma if they ever tried to leave him. In his place stood a figure of respectability, radiating the confidence of someone who had never doubted his own righteousness. David's hands, the same hands that had left bruises on Sarah's throat and shattered their daughter's sense of safety, now carried a leather briefcase filled with carefully crafted lies and fabricated evidence designed to paint him as the victim. Richard Hayes, David's attorney, emerged from his own Mercedes, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. Known throughout Texas legal circles as the magician for his ability to make the guilty appear innocent, Hayes had built his career on defending the indefensible. His client roster read like a who's who of white-collar criminals, corrupt politicians, and domestic abusers who could afford his astronomical fees. At 65, Hayes had silver hair that gave him a distinguished appearance, but his pale blue eyes held the coldness of a predator who had long ago abandoned any pretense of conscience. "Remember, David," Hayes said as they walked toward the courthouse steps, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Today is about perception, not truth. The judge needs to see a heartbroken father fighting for his daughter, not what?" David's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of the rage that simmered constantly beneath his polished exterior. "I am fighting for my daughter. Sarah's poisoned her against me with her lies." Hayes studied his client with the calculating gaze of a chess master analyzing his pieces. David Martinez was simultaneously his greatest asset and his biggest liability. The man's ability to charm was genuinely impressive. Hayes had watched David reduce hardened prosecutors to sympathetic listeners and convince skeptical judges that he was the real victim. But David's narcissism and barely contained violence made him unpredictable. And unpredictable clients were dangerous in courtrooms where every word and gesture could determine the outcome. "Your daughter hasn't spoken in 6 months, David," Hayes reminded him quietly as they approached the metal detectors. "That works in our favor. Without her testimony, Sarah's case relies entirely on her word against yours, and I've already planted enough doubt about her mental stability to make any judge question her credibility." David's jaw tightened at the mention of Emma's silence. Part of him felt a twisted satisfaction that his daughter had learned the lesson. He'd tried to teach her that night that speaking about family business to outsiders brought consequences. But another part of him, a part he rarely acknowledged, was disturbed by the hollow, terrified look in Emma's eyes whenever she saw him during supervised visits. It was the same look Sarah used to get when his temper flared, and it reminded David of his own childhood, spent walking on eggshells around his violent father. The courthouse lobby buzzed with activity as lawyers, defendants, and families navigated the complex ecosystem of the justice system. David moved through the crowd like a politician working a room, nodding politely to court staff who recognized him from previous appearances, maintaining the image of a man comfortable in his own innocence. Several people who knew him professionally, business associates who had never seen behind his carefully constructed facade, offered supportive nods and wished him luck. "David Martinez, didn't expect to see you here," called out James Peterson, a fellow real estate developer who had partnered with David on several lucrative deals. "Hope everything works out with the custody situation. Kids need their fathers, you know." "Thanks, Jim," David replied with practiced warmth, shaking the man's hand with just the right amount of grip, firm but not aggressive, confident but appropriately concerned. "It's been tough, but I'm confident the truth will come out. Emma needs her dad, and I won't give up fighting for her." The performance was flawless, but Hayes noticed how David's left hand clenched into a fist at his side, tell that revealed the violence always lurking beneath the surface. As they made their way toward Judge Harrison's courtroom, Hayes mentally reviewed their strategy. They had character witnesses who would testify to David's reputation as a loving father, financial records showing his consistent child support payments, and most importantly, a narrative that painted Sarah as an unstable woman who had brainwashed their daughter against him. The plan had worked before. Hayes had used similar tactics to help dozens of abusive men maintain custody or visitation rights with children who feared them. Family court judges, overwhelmed with impossible caseloads and limited time, often defaulted to maintaining parental relationships unless presented with overwhelming evidence of abuse. Without Emma's testimony, Sarah's case relied heavily on her own credibility, and Hayes had spent months systematically destroying that credibility through depositions, psychological evaluations, and carefully leaked rumors about her mental health. As they approached the courtroom doors, David caught his first glimpse of Sarah sitting in the gallery with her attorney, Lisa Chun. Even from across the hallway, he could see the toll the past months had taken on his ex-wife. Sarah looked fragile, diminished, exactly as he had intended. But what made David's carefully controlled expression falter was the sight of Emma sitting in the front row, a large golden retriever at her feet. "What the hell is that dog doing in there?" David hissed. To Hayes, his composure cracking slightly. The animal's presence felt like a violation of his carefully planned narrative, an unpredictable element that didn't fit into the script he had rehearsed. Hayes frowned, making a mental note to object to the therapy dog's presence immediately. Animals in courtrooms were irregular and potentially prejudicial, designed to evoke sympathy rather than reveal truth. "I'll have it removed before testimony begins," he assured David. "Judges don't like courtroom theatrics." But as David stared through the glass doors at his daughter and her canine companion, something cold settled in his stomach. Emma appeared more alert than he had seen her in months, and the dog seemed to be watching everything with an intelligence that made David inexplicably uncomfortable. For a man who had built his success on controlling every variable in his environment, the presence of this unknown element felt threatening. "This changes nothing," David muttered, more to himself than to Hayes. "She's still just a scared little girl who won't talk. And dogs don't testify in court." As they entered the courtroom to begin the most important performance of David Martinez's life, neither he nor his high-powered attorney could have imagined that they were walking into a trap. 6 months in the making, one set by a traumatized child and her extraordinary companion, who together possessed the power to expose the monster hiding behind the perfect smile. The tension in Judge Harrison's courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife as Richard Hayes rose to his feet, his silver hair catching the fluorescent lights like a predator's mane. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of 3 decades spent manipulating legal proceedings, "I must object to the presence of this animal in what should be a solemn legal proceeding. This therapy dog is nothing more than a theatrical prop designed to evoke sympathy and prejudice this court against my client." Judge Harrison studied the scene before her with the sharp eyes of someone who had presided over thousands of custody battles. Emma sat rigidly in the witness chair, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing furniture, while Scout lay calmly at her feet, his golden coat a stark contrast to the sterile courtroom environment. The child's breathing had visibly steadied since the dog's arrival, and her death grip on the blood-stained teddy bear had relaxed slightly. "Ms. Chun," the judge addressed Sarah's attorney, "what is your justification for this animal's presence in my courtroom?" Lisa Chun stood, her own nerves barely concealed beneath her professional demeanor. She was a relatively young attorney, only 5 years out of law school, and this case represented the biggest challenge of her career. Going up against Richard Hayes was like a high school athlete facing an Olympic champion, but Emma's welfare depended on her ability to level the playing field. "Your Honor, Scout is not merely a therapy dog, but a certified emotional support animal, specifically trained to assist trauma victims," Chun explained, consulting her notes with slightly trembling hands. "Dr. James Wright, Emma's treating psychologist, has provided documentation that Emma's selective mutism following the traumatic events of October 15th has been significantly improved through her work with Scout. The dog's presence is medically necessary for Emma's psychological stability during these proceedings." Hayes scoffed audibly, a calculated sound designed to convey his disdain for what he considered legal theatrics. "Your Honor, this court deals in facts and testimony, not emotional manipulation through adorable animals. If the child cannot provide testimony without props, perhaps she's not competent to testify at all." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She watched from the gallery as Emma's face went pale, her small hands beginning to move in those subtle patterns that had become so familiar over the past months. Scout's ears perked up immediately, his massive head turning toward Emma as if receiving a signal that no one else could detect. David Martinez leaned forward in his seat, studying his daughter with cold calculation. Throughout their marriage, he had become an expert at reading Sarah's fear responses, knowing exactly which words and gestures would reduce her to trembling submission. Now he found himself analyzing Emma with the same predatory instinct, noting how her breathing changed when Hayes spoke, how her grip on the teddy bear tightened at certain phrases. "That mutt doesn't belong in my courtroom," David whispered harshly to Hayes, his mask slipping enough to reveal the venom beneath. "Get rid of it, now." But Judge Harrison was observing something that neither Hayes nor David had noticed. Emma's subtle hand movements weren't random nervous gestures. They appeared deliberate, purposeful, as if the child was trying to communicate something. And more remarkably, Scout seemed to be responding to these movements with his own subtle shifts in position and alertness. "I'm going to allow a brief demonstration," Judge Harrison announced, silencing the objections before they could be voiced. "I want to understand exactly what therapeutic benefit this animal provides, and whether its presence is truly necessary for this child's welfare." David's jaw clenched so hard that the muscle in his cheek began to twitch, a warning sign that Sarah recognized with sick familiarity. When David's temper began to build, that twitch was always the first indicator, followed by the clenched fists, then the explosion of violence that had terrorized their household for years. During the brief recess that followed, David cornered Sarah in the courthouse hallway, positioning himself so that his body blocked her from the view of others. To any casual observer, it might have looked like an ex-husband attempting to have a civilized conversation with his former wife. But Sarah could see the fury burning in David's steel-gray eyes, could feel the barely contained violence radiating from his carefully controlled posture. "Listen to me very carefully," David said, his voice a low whisper that carried the weight of years of threats. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing with that dog, but it ends now. When I get Emma back, and I will get her back, that mutt disappears. Permanently. And if you've been coaching our daughter to perform for these bleeding heart liberals, there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" Sarah's blood turned to ice as memories of similar threats flooded back. David had always been careful to issue his most serious warnings in settings where no one else could hear, maintaining plausible deniability while ensuring his message was crystal clear. The threat against Scout was particularly chilling because Sarah knew David was capable of following through. During their marriage, he had disappeared Sarah's cat after it had accidentally scratched his leather couch, claiming it had run away while she was at work. "You can't threaten me anymore, David," Sarah managed to whisper back, though her voice betrayed her fear. "The judge will see through your act eventually." David's smile was cold and predatory. "Will she?" "I've been through this before, Sarah. Judges see what they want to see, and what they want to see is a loving father fighting for his child. Your word against mine, remember? And without little Emma's voice to back you up, you're just another hysterical ex-wife making wild accusations." Across the hallway, Emma sat on a bench with Scout beside her, her sharp ears picking up the tension in her parents' voices, even if she couldn't make out the specific words. Her small hands began moving in increasingly frantic patterns, and Scout responded by pressing closer to her side, his warm bulk providing comfort and security in a world that had become unpredictable and dangerous. Maria Rodriguez, who had been called to the courthouse to explain Scout's training, noticed the interaction between Emma and the dog from across the hall. What she saw made her heart race with excitement and terror in equal measure. Emma wasn't just nervous, she was actively communicating, using the sophisticated signal system they had developed together. And more remarkably, Scout was responding with the precise behavioral modifications they had practiced during their intensive training sessions. "She's trying to tell us something," Maria whispered to Lisa Chun, who had joined them during the recess. "Emma isn't just sitting there waiting. She's been testifying this entire time. We just haven't been listening." As court prepared to reconvene, Sarah returned to her seat with David's threats echoing in her mind. She watched her daughters' subtle hand movements with new eyes, suddenly recognizing that Emma's constant gestures weren't random nervous habits, but purposeful communication. For the first time since October 15th, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Emma hadn't lost her voice. She had found a new one. David Martinez took his seat with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. He had intimidated Sarah into silence. His attorney had nearly succeeded in removing the therapy dog, and Emma remained locked in the trauma-induced mutism that protected his secrets. But as he glanced toward his daughter, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. Emma was looking directly at him for the first time in months, and her hands were moving in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. For a man who had built his life on controlling every variable, the sight of his daughter's strange hand movements felt like a crack in his carefully constructed armor. David had no way of knowing that Emma and Scout had been preparing for this moment for months, developing a secret language that would soon expose every lie he had told and every threat he had made. The real battle was about to begin, and the most dangerous weapon in the courtroom was a 7-year-old girl who had learned to speak without words. The moment David Martinez stepped into the witness stand, the atmosphere in Judge Harrison's courtroom shifted like the air pressure before a violent storm. Dressed in his perfectly tailored navy suit, David projected an image of wounded dignity. As he placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, his voice carried just the right note of paternal pain as he began his carefully rehearsed testimony, painting himself as a devoted father torn from his beloved daughter by a vindictive ex-wife's lies. "Your Honor," David began, his steel-gray eyes glistening with what appeared to be unshed tears, "I love my daughter more than life itself. Emma was Daddy's little girl. We had tea parties. I read her bedtime stories every night, took her to the zoo every weekend. The idea that I could ever hurt her or her mother is not just false, it's devastating to me as a father." From her position in the witness chair, Emma Martinez heard every calculated word of her father's performance, and her small body began to respond in ways that no one in the courtroom understood, except for one magnificent golden retriever whose amber eyes never left her hands. Emma's fingers, which had been still during David's oath, began to move in subtle, deliberate patterns against the worn fabric of Mr. Button's, her blood-stained teddy bear. Scout's massive head tilted slightly to the left, a movement so small that most observers would dismiss it as a dog simply adjusting his position. But Maria Rodriguez, sitting in the gallery with a growing sense of excitement and dread, recognized the gesture immediately. It was Scout's response to Emma's signal for danger present, a warning they had practiced hundreds of times during their intensive training sessions. David continued his testimony with the smooth confidence of a master manipulator. The night of October 15th was a terrible misunderstanding. Sarah had been drinking. She'd been struggling with alcohol for months, and when I tried to help her to bed, she fell and hit her head on the kitchen counter. I was so focused on getting her medical attention that I didn't even realize Emma had called 911 until the police arrived. Emma's hands began to move more rapidly, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. Scout immediately shifted his position, rising from his lying posture to sit upright, his body forming a protective barrier between Emma and her father. The dog's ears flattened slightly against his head, another precise response to Emma's increasingly frantic signals. The accusations of domestic violence are heartbreaking fabrications, David continued, his voice breaking with apparent emotion. I would never raise a hand against the two people I love most in this world. I believe Sarah's injuries and her subsequent claims are the result of her alcoholism and possible mental health issues that I'd been encouraging her to address. Corp reporter Janet Mills, whose fingers had been flying across her stenograph, machine capturing every word, noticed something extraordinary happening in her peripheral vision. The little girl in the witness chair wasn't just sitting quietly, her hands were moving in complex, purposeful patterns that seemed almost like ... language. And more remarkably, the therapy dog was responding to each movement with precise behavioral changes that appeared anything but random. Emma's signals became more specific and urgent. Her left hand formed a small fist near her heart, a sign for pain, while her right hand traced small circles in the air, indicating lies or false information. Scout's response was immediate and unmistakable. He moved to position himself directly facing David, his body language shifting from calm alertness to protective tension. Judge Harrison, who had been observing the proceedings with growing fascination, noticed the pattern of interaction between child and dog. In 30 years on the bench, Patricia Harrison had developed an almost supernatural ability to read courtroom dynamics, and something about this silent communication felt profoundly significant. Mr. Martinez, Judge Harrison interrupted David's testimony, causing him to falter mid-sentence. I need to address something that's been occurring during your testimony. Your daughter appears to be communicating with her therapy dog in some fashion. Can you explain what might be causing her distress? David's carefully constructed mask slipped for just a moment. revealing a flash of the rage that had terrorized his family for years. Your Honor, I have no idea what you mean. Emma hasn't spoken since the night of the incident. She's been traumatized by her mother's false accusations. But as David spoke, Emma's signals became even more frantic. Her hands moved in rapid succession. Danger, liar, hurt, scared, help. Scout's responses escalated, accordingly rising to his feet, positioning himself protectively, his hackles beginning to rise as he sensed Emma's escalating distress. That's enough, Richard Hayes interjected, rising quickly from his seat. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of theatrical manipulation I warned against. The child is clearly being prompted by. Sit down, Mr. Hayes, Judge Harrison commanded sharply. Something is happening here that I need to understand. She turned to the gallery. Is there someone present who can explain what I'm observing? Between this child and her therapy dog. Maria Rodriguez stood slowly, her heart pounding with the knowledge that the next few minutes could change everything. Your Honor, my name is Maria Rodriguez, and I'm the trainer who worked with Emma. And Scout, what you're witnessing is a form of communication, a language that Emma and Scout have developed together. The courtroom erupted in confused murmurs. David's face went white, then flushed red with fury. This is insane, he shouted, abandoning all pretense of judicial decorum. They're putting words in my daughter's mouth through some kind of animal trick. But Emma, hearing her father's raised voice, the same tone that had preceded every violent outburst in their household, began, signing with desperate urgency. Her movements became a torrent of communication. Scared, angry man, hurt mommy, blood, hiding, called for help, danger, danger, danger. Scout's response was extraordinary. The dog moved to place himself completely between Emma and David, his body language shifting to full protection mode. He didn't growl or bark. His training was too sophisticated for such obvious displays, but every line of his body communicated that he was prepared to defend his small companion against any threat. Your Honor, Maria said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Emma has been trying to tell us something since she entered this courtroom. She's been testifying this entire time. We just haven't known how to listen. Scout has been translating her signals, responding to her communications about what really happened that night. Judge Harrison stared at the scene before her, a traumatized child desperately trying to communicate through hand signals, a specially trained dog interpreting and responding to each gesture, and a man whose calm facade was crumbling under the weight of what was being revealed without words. Mr. Martinez, the judge said quietly, your daughter appears to be reacting to your testimony with considerable distress. Her communication with her therapy dog suggests she has a very different version of the events you've described. David's control finally snapped completely. She's 7 years old. He screamed, spittle flying from his lips. She doesn't know what she's saying. This is all Sarah's coaching and this ridiculous dog show. But his outburst only confirmed what Emma's silent testimony had been revealing all along. In losing his temper, David Martinez had shown the courtroom exactly the kind of man he really was, and Emma's frantic signals too. Scout told everyone present that this was the same terrifying rage she had witnessed that horrible October night. The secret language had been unleashed, and the truth was finally beginning to speak. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Judge Patricia Harrison made a decision that would rewrite legal history. Rising from her bench with the gravity of Solomon, preparing to render judgment, she fixed her steely gaze on the extraordinary. Seen before her a traumatized child, desperately trying to communicate through hand signals while her specially trained companion translated each gesture into a living testimony that spoke louder than any words ever could. This court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Harrison announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I want Ms. Rodriguez to demonstrate this communication system for the court. Mr. Hayes, your objections are noted, but overruled. If this child has found a way to testify about the events in question, this court has an obligation to hear her. Richard Hayes shot to his feet like a man whose house was on fire. Your Honor, this is unprecedented. There's no legal foundation for accepting the interpretations of dog behavior as testimony. This is a circus, not a courtroom. But David Martinez's violent outburst had already damaged their carefully constructed narrative beyond repair. The mask of the grieving father had been ripped away, revealing the monster beneath, and everyone in the courtroom had witnessed the transformation. David sat slumped in the witness chair, his expensive suit rumpled, sweat beading on his forehead, as he realized his perfect performance was crumbling around him. During the recess, Maria Rodriguez moved to the center of the courtroom with Scout and Emma, her heart pounding with the knowledge that the next few minutes would either validate 3 months of revolutionary work or destroy Emma's last chance at justice. She had trained therapy dogs for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment standing in a court of law, about to prove that a 7-year-old girl and her canine companion had developed a communication system sophisticated enough to expose the truth about domestic violence. Emma, Maria said gently, kneeling beside the small girl who had become the center of this legal storm. Can you show the judge how you and Scout talk to each other? Emma's dark eyes, which had been hollow and distant for months, suddenly blazed with intelligence and determination. For the first time since that horrible October night, someone was asking her to speak her truth, not with words that had been stolen by trauma, but with the secret language she and Scout had perfected together. Judge Harrison, attorneys, court, staff, and gallery observers watched in fascination as Emma began to demonstrate the extraordinary communication system. Her left hand formed a gentle fist against her heart, the signal for love or safe feelings. Scout immediately responded by moving closer to her side, his tail wagging softly, his entire demeanor radiating calm protectiveness. This is how Emma tells Scout when she feels safe and loved, Maria explained to the transfixed courtroom. Now watch this. Emma's expression grew serious, and her hands shifted to form different patterns, a closed fist moving away from her body, followed by a sharp downward gesture. Scout's response was immediate and dramatic. He moved to position himself between Emma and where David sat, his body language shifting to alert protection mode. That, Maria said, her voice heavy with meaning, is how Emma communicates danger and threat. Scout has been trained to recognize over 200 different signals, each with specific meanings and appropriate responses. David Martinez felt his world tilting on its axis as he watched his daughter's hands weave a narrative that threatened to expose every secret he'd fought to hide. She's just a child playing with a dog, he called out desperately. This proves nothing, but Emma wasn't finished. Her small hands began moving in increasingly complex patterns, telling a story that had been locked inside her traumatized psyche for 6 months. She signaled angry man by forming aggressive gestures, followed by hurt woman through protective, cradling motions. Scout's responses were precise and heartbreaking. He moved to show protection, comfort, and alert vigilance. Sarah Martinez watched from the gallery with tears streaming down her face as her daughter finally found a way to speak about the unspeakable. Through Emma's hands and Scout's responses, the courtroom was witnessing the most authentic testimony imaginable, unfiltered by adult coaching, uncompromised by legal manipulation, pure truth expressed through the bond between a traumatized child and her extraordinary companion. Your Honor, Lisa Chun said, her voice thick with emotion. What we're witnessing is Emma's testimony about the night of October 15th. She's telling us, through Scout, exactly what happened in their home. Emma's signals became more specific and urgent. She demonstrated how someone had grabbed and thrown another person, her small hands showing a violent motion, while Scout moved to show protective intervention. She showed hiding, fear, and the act of using a telephone for help. Each gesture was met with Scout's corresponding behavioral response, creating a dialogue that transcended the limitations of traditional spoken testimony. Judge Harrison had seen thousands of witnesses take the stand during her 3 decades in family court, but she had never witnessed anything as compelling or authentic as this silent testimony. Emma's communication through Scout carried the ring of absolute truth. No coaching could have created this level of sophisticated interaction. No manipulation could have produced the genuine trauma responses she was observing. "Mr. Martinez," Judge Harrison addressed David directly, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority. "Your daughter is communicating very specific information about events that allegedly took place in your home. Her signals suggest she witnessed violence between you and her mother. How do you respond to this testimony?" David's composure shattered completely. "It's not testimony. It's a trained dog doing tricks. My daughter is being manipulated by these people who want to destroy my relationship with her. This whole thing is insane." But his protests only reinforced what Emma's signals had been communicating all along. As David's voice rose to the same threatening tone that had terrorized their household, Emma's hands moved in frantic patterns that Scout interpreted as extreme danger. The dog immediately moved to full protection mode, placing his body as a shield between Emma and her father. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the truth played out before their eyes, not in words that could be twisted or denied, but in the pure, unfiltered communication between a traumatized child and the companion who had become her voice. Emma Martinez had found a way to testify about the unthinkable, and her testimony was about to change everything. Judge Harrison looked at the scene before her, a 7-year-old girl whose hands spoke volumes about violence and fear, a therapy dog whose responses validated every gesture, and a man whose angry denials only confirmed the story being told without words. "This court recognizes that we are witnessing a form of testimony," Judge Harrison declared, her words making legal history. "Emma Martinez is communicating through her trained companion, and this court will consider her statements as evidence." In these proceedings, the revolution had begun, and justice was finally finding its voice through the most unlikely of partnerships. The transformation of David Martinez from charming defendant to exposed predator happened with the terrifying swiftness of a Jekyll and Hyde metamorphosis. As Emma's silent testimony continued through her increasingly confident hand signals, David's carefully constructed facade didn't just crack, it exploded into 1,000 pieces, revealing the monster that Sarah had lived in terror of for years, and that Emma had witnessed in all his violent fury that October night. "This is ENOUG," David roared, his voice echoing off the courtroom walls with such force that several spectators physically recoiled. His steel-gray eyes, which had projected wounded dignity moments before, now blazed with the uncontrolled rage of a cornered predator. "I will not sit here and watch my daughter be turned into a performing monkey by these sick people." Emma's response was immediate and visceral. Her small body began trembling violently as the sound of her father's raised voice triggered every trauma response her young nervous system had developed over 6 months of protective silence. Her hands moved in rapid, desperate patterns, the signals for angry man, danger, hurt, and scared, flowing together in a torrent of terrified communication that Scout interpreted with heartbreaking precision. The golden retriever's transformation was equally dramatic. Gone was the calm therapy dog who had been peacefully demonstrating trained responses. In his place stood a 75-pound guardian whose every instinct screamed protection. Scout moved with fluid grace to place his entire body between Emma and David, his hackles rising, his usually gentle amber eyes now fixed on the man who represented the greatest threat his young companion had ever known. "Look at him," David screamed, pointing at Scout with a shaking finger. "That animal is aggressive. He's threatening me in open court. This proves these people have trained both the dog and my daughter to attack me." But everyone in the courtroom could see the truth that David's narcissistic rage blinded him too. Scout wasn't showing aggression. He was showing protection. The dog's body language was that of a sentinel standing guard, not an attacker preparing to strike. His positioning was defensive, calculated to shield Emma from harm rather than to inflict it. Judge Harrison had witnessed thousands of emotional outbursts in her 3 decades on the bench, but David's meltdown was particularly revealing because of its context. As Emma's hands continued to move in frantic signals now communicating, "Same angry man," "October night," and "Mommy hurt," David's behavior was providing real-time validation of every accusation his daughter was making through her extraordinary communication system. "Mr. Martinez, you need to calm down immediately," Judge Harrison commanded, her voice carrying the full authority of 30 years in family court. "Your behavior is frightening your daughter and disrupting these proceedings." "My daughter?" David's laugh was bitter and unhinged. "She's not my daughter anymore. You've turned her into some kind of trained seal performing tricks with that mutt. The real Emma loved her daddy. She used to run to me when I came home from work, used to beg me to read her bedtime stories." Sarah watched from the gallery in horror as David revealed the depth of his delusion. Even now, confronted with Emma's terror-filled responses to his presence, he couldn't acknowledge the reality of what he had done to their family. In his twisted perception, Emma's fear was evidence of brainwashing rather than a natural response to the trauma he had inflicted. Emma's signals became more specific and damning as David's outburst continued. Through Maria Rodriguez's translation, the courtroom learned devastating details that no coaching could have created. Emma showed how David had grabbed Sarah by the throat, demonstrated the way he had thrown her mother down the stairs, and recreated the threatening gestures he had made toward Emma herself when she had tried to help her injured mother. "She's lying," David screamed, his face now purple with rage. "Everything she's showing you is a lie fed to her by that vindictive witch I was married to. Sarah always hated how close Emma and I were. She couldn't stand that Emma was Daddy's special girl." The phrases sent a chill through everyone present. Lisa Chan exchanged a meaningful glance with Sarah, both recognizing the possessive language that often accompanied inappropriate father-daughter dynamics. David's references to Emma as his special girl and his obsession with their closeness revealed layers of dysfunction that went beyond physical violence. Emma's hands trembled as she signaled something that made Scout move into the most protective position he had ever assumed. Through Maria's horrified translation, Emma was communicating that David had threatened to kill Scout if she ever told anyone what she had witnessed. The threat against her beloved companion, the one being who had given her a voice, was perhaps the most chilling revelation of all. "You threatened to kill her therapy dog?" Judge Harrison asked, her voice barely containing her disgust. "I never," David started, then caught himself, but it was too late. His moment of hesitation before the denial told everyone in the courtroom that Emma's silent testimony was accurate. Richard Hayes, recognizing that his client was destroying any chance of a favorable outcome, attempted damage control. "Your Honor, my client is understandably emotional, seeing his daughter in distress. His daughter is in distress because of him." Sarah finally exploded from the gallery, her months of silent terror giving way to protective fury. "Look at her. Look how she reacts to his voice. That's not coaching. That's trauma." Indeed, Emma's physical response to David's continued shouting was heartbreaking to witness. The small girl who had shown such courage in communicating through her secret language was now curled in on herself, making the rapid hand signals for hide, scared, and help me over and over again, while Scout pressed against her, providing what comfort he could. David's final act of self-destruction came when he lunged toward the witness area. Whether to intimidate Emma into silence or to physically confront Scout was unclear. "I've had enough of this circus," he bellowed. "That's my daughter, and I won't let you turn her against me." Court security moved to restrain David as Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Martinez, you are in contempt of court. Officers, remove him from my courtroom immediately." As David was forcibly escorted out, his parting words were a stream of threats and curses directed at everyone who had dared to listen to his daughter's silent testimony. "You'll all pay for this," he screamed as the courtroom doors closed behind him. "That dog will disappear, Sarah. And when I get custody back, you'll never see Emma again." The threats, made in open court and recorded by the stenographer, would later become additional charges against David Martinez. But in that moment, as silence finally returned to Judge Harrison's courtroom, 7-year-old Emma Martinez looked up from her protective crouch and made one final signal to Scout. The signal meant, "Monster gone," and for the first time in 6 months, Scout's tail wagged with genuine joy as he recognized that his young companion finally felt safe enough to hope that the nightmare might actually be ending. The monster had been exposed, not by lawyers or expert witnesses, but by a little girl who had found the courage to speak her truth through the extraordinary bond she shared with her 4-legged protector. The silence that followed David Martinez's explosive removal from Judge Patricia Harrison's courtroom was profound and healing, like the first calm breath after a violent storm. For the first time in 6 months, Emma Martinez sat in that imposing witness chair without the weight of her father's threatening presence crushing down on her small shoulders. Scout, sensing the fundamental shift in the courtroom's energy, relaxed his protective stance, but remained close to his young companion, his amber eyes still watchful, but no longer radiating the tension of imminent threat. Judge Harrison took a long moment to compose herself, studying the extraordinary scene that had unfolded in her courtroom over the past 2 hours. In 30 years of presiding over family court proceedings, she had witnessed the full spectrum of human behavior, noble and the despicable, the heartbreaking and the inspiring. But never had she encountered anything as remarkable as the silent testimony that had just exposed one of the most dangerous predators she had ever seen disguised as a loving father. The weight of the decision before her was historic. What she was about to rule would set legal precedent not just in Texas, but potentially across the entire nation. Child advocacy groups, legal scholars, and therapy animal organizations would study this case for decades to come. But beyond the academic implications, Judge Harrison knew that her words in the next few minutes would determine the future of a traumatized little girl who had found the courage to speak truth through the most extraordinary partnership she had ever witnessed. "Emma," Judge Harrison said gently, her stern judicial demeanor softening as she addressed the small figure in the witness chair, "I want you to know that what you've done today required incredible bravery. Through Scout, you've told this court things that no child should ever have to communicate. But your courage has helped us understand the truth about what happened in your home." Emma's dark eyes, which had been hollow and lifeless for months, now held a spark of something that had been missing since that horrible October night hope. Her small hands moved in gentle patterns against Scout's golden fur, no longer the frantic signals of terror and desperation, but the calm communications of a child who finally felt heard and believed. Sarah Martinez sat in the gallery with tears streaming down her face, watching her daughter emerge from the psychological prison that trauma had created. For 6 months, Sarah had wondered if she would ever see the light return to Emma's eyes, if her vibrant, chatty little girl would ever find her voice again. Now, witnessing Emma's peaceful interaction with Scout in the aftermath of her father's explosive departure, Sarah dared to hope that healing was finally possible. Judge Harrison rose from her bench with the solemnity of someone about to deliver a judgment that would echo through legal history. "In my 3 decades presiding over family court," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom, "I have never witnessed testimony more powerful, more authentic, or more compelling than what this court has heard today. From Emma Martinez, through her extraordinary partnership with Scout." The courtroom remained absolutely silent, everyone present recognizing that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in the intersection of justice, trauma recovery, and the human-animal bond. The traditional legal system requires that testimony be delivered through spoken words, Judge Harrison continued, but trauma has a way of stealing voices, particularly from our most vulnerable victims. What Emma and Scout have demonstrated today is that communication transcends speech, that truth can be expressed through bonds of trust and love that words alone could never capture. Emma's hands moved in a small, graceful gesture, the signal for understanding that she and Scout had practiced countless times. Scout's response was a gentle nuzzle against her arm, his tail wagging softly as he sensed that their long journey toward justice was nearing a successful conclusion. "Based on the testimony presented today," Judge Harrison declared, "including the unprecedented but undeniably authentic communication between Emma Martinez and her therapy dog Scout, this court awards full legal and physical custody of Emma Martinez to her mother, Sarah Martinez." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration, not the raucous cheering that might follow a sports victory, but the profound relief of people who had witnessed justice prevail against seemingly impossible odds. Sarah collapsed into sobs of relief, while Emma's attorney, Lisa Chun, felt the weight of her first major case victory settle over her with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice growing stern as she addressed the broader implications of David's behavior, "based on Mr. Martinez's violent outburst in this courtroom, and the credible testimony about his threats against both his daughter and her therapy animal, this court is issuing a permanent restraining order. David Martinez is prohibited from any unsupervised contact with Emma Martinez and is banned from coming within 500 feet of the child or her therapy dog." Emma's response to this news was perhaps the most moving moment of the entire proceeding. Her small hands formed the signal for safe, and then moved into the gesture for forever. Scout's tail wagged with genuine joy as he interpreted her communication. After months of fear and uncertainty, Emma finally believed that the nightmare was truly over. Additionally, Judge Harrison added, this court is referring this case to the Travis County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution. The evidence presented today suggests that Emma Martinez witnessed felony domestic violence, and Mr. Martinez's behavior in this courtroom indicates a continuing threat to public safety. As court adjourned, something miraculous happened. Emma Martinez, who hadn't spoken aloud since that terrible October night 6 months ago, looked directly at Judge Harrison and whispered 2 words that brought tears to every eye in the courtroom. "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible, rusty from months of disuse, but it carried the power of truth finally acknowledged and justice finally served. Scout's ears perked up at the sound of his companion's spoken words, and his tail wagged with the pure joy of a mission accomplished. 6 months later, Emma Martinez was not only speaking again, but thriving in ways that amazed everyone who had witnessed her journey. She continued her partnership with Scout, but their communication had evolved from desperate necessity to joyful collaboration. Together, they visited other trauma victims, demonstrating that healing could come through the most unexpected partnerships and that sometimes the most powerful voices were those that spoke from the heart rather than just the mouth. The case of Martinez v. Martinez became a landmark in family law, establishing legal precedent for accepting non-traditional forms of testimony from trauma victims. Law schools began teaching courses on alternative communication methods, and therapy dog training programs incorporated Maria Rodriguez's revolutionary signaling system into their standard curriculum. But for Emma Martinez, the true victory wasn't the legal precedent or the academic recognition. It was the simple fact that she could sleep peacefully at night, knowing that the monster who had haunted her nightmares was gone forever, and that she had found her voice through the love and loyalty of an extraordinary golden retriever who had taught her that sometimes the most important conversations happened without words. Justice had prevailed, not through legal maneuvering or courtroom theatrics, but through the pure, unbreakable bond between a traumatized child and the therapy dog who became her voice when she had no words left to speak. In a world where truth was often silenced by fear, Emma Martinez and Scout had proven that love could find a way to make itself heard.